Have you ever been made to feel worthless by the people who are supposed to love you most? For me, that feeling had a price tag: $1.99. That was the cost of the piggy bank they gave me for Christmas. The same day my sister got a luxury car. They had no idea that their cheap insult would eventually cost them over $50,000. This is a story about drawing a line in the sand. If you've ever had to fight for your own self-worth, hit that subscribe button. Because this community gets it. The air on Christmas morning has a scent you can't replicate. It's not just the sharp, clean fragrance of pine needles slowly drying by the fireplace, or the warm, comforting wave of cinnamon and melting butter from my mother's kitchen. It's the smell of expectation. For 34 years, I'd woken up to that smell. And every single year, a foolish, younger part of me would hope that this time, things would be different. That morning, as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the Ohio snow, I realized hope was just a habit I needed to break. I was sitting on the polished hardwood floor, cross-legged, surrounded by the festive carnage of wrapping paper. My little pile of torn paper was neat. The pieces folded into a tidy square. Across from me, my sister, Jessica, was camped in a mountain of glittering paper and ribbons, a testament to her queenly status in this house. She was 2 years younger than me. But in the unspoken currency of our family's affection, she was a billionaire. And I was perpetually overdrawn. She was shaking a small, rectangular box next to her ear, a sly grin playing on her perfectly glossed lips. "This one feels expensive." "Dad," she sang out, her voice a practiced melody of charm. My dad, already on his second cup of coffee, let out a deep, rumbling laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated pride. Only the best for my girl. My mom glided over, her festive apron tied neatly around her waist, and handed me a mug. The coffee was hot, bitter. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Victoria, honey, you haven't opened your big one yet. It's right behind you." She pointed to a large, almost comically oversized box. I knew from its weightlessness that it was mostly air. Before I could even reach for it, a theatrical shriek sliced through the quiet hum of the morning. Jessica had ripped the paper from her small box, revealing the sleek, minimalist packaging of BMW. Nestled inside, on a bed of black velvet, was a single key fob, its silver emblem gleaming under the lights of the Christmas tree. "Oh my God, you did not!" she screamed. Leaping to her feet, she threw her arms around our dad's neck, and he lifted her off the ground in a hug, spinning her around. It was a scene from a movie, perfectly rehearsed. Had to be done. "Princess," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he set her down. "You've got to impress those big design clients. Can't have you showing up to a pitch meeting in that 5-year-old Honda." Through the large bay window, past the swirling snowflakes, I could see it. It was parked at the end of the driveway. A pristine, snow-white BMW 4 Series convertible. A ridiculously large, perfectly tied red bow was perched on its roof. It was an object of such blatant, unapologetic favoritism that it felt like a declaration, a public announcement of my place in this family. And it wasn't in the driver's seat. My parents stood side by side, beaming at Jessica, who was pressing the unlock button on the fob, making the car's lights flash in the gray morning. They were glowing with a pride so intense it was practically a physical force in the room. "Victoria, your gift," my mom prompted again. Her voice had an edge to it now, A command disguised as a gentle reminder. Play your part. Keep the scene moving. With a sigh I didn't mean to be audible, I pulled the large, light box into my lap. The wrapping paper was thin. The kind that tears if you look at it too hard. I peeled it away. Inside was a piggy bank. Not a charming, handcrafted ceramic one that you might find in a boutique. This was a mass-produced, bubblegum-pink plastic pig. Its eyes were too cartoonish and lock. Vacant black dots. I could feel the sharp, cheap seam running down its back where the two halves had been fused together. It probably weighed less than the mug of coffee in my hand. I turned it over. The price tag from a discount store was still clinging to its belly. The corners peeling. 1美元. 99. The buzzing energy in the room vanished. It was sucked into the vacuum created by this cheap piece of plastic. Jessica stopped mid-giggle. Her new key held halfway to her lips. My dad cleared his throat. Well? Go on. Open it. Honey, Mom said, her voice a little too loud. A little too bright. There's something inside. My fingers felt clumsy as I fumbled with the rubber stopper on its underside. It came out with a pathetic squeak. 2 single-dollar bills. Folded into a tight square. Fell into my palm. They felt like nothing. It's your new home fund, Dad boomed, slapping his knee as if he'd just delivered the punchline to a brilliant joke. We know how disciplined you are. Saving up for a down payment. You've always been the responsible one with money. Not a spendthrift like your sister. He winked at Jessica, who, now that the awkward moment had been explained away, resumed her role with a playful shrug. Responsible. There was that word again. It was the explanation for every disparity. The excuse for every act of neglect. It was the label they'd branded me with. And it meant I was expected to give everything and require nothing. The responsible one doesn't get a pony for her birthday. She gets a savings bond. The responsible one doesn't get a trip to Europe after graduation. She gets a firm handshake and a reminder about her student loans. The responsible one doesn't get a BMW. She gets a $2 contribution to a future she is expected to build entirely on her own. I stared at the vacant expression of the plastic pig, and the memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. My 10th birthday. We were in this very dining room. My mom had bought a sheet cake from the grocery store. The kind with frosting that was pure food coloring and wax. I can still taste it. 3 of my friends had come. They sat there, shifting awkwardly in their chairs. While we waited for my parents to come home, they were late. Of course. It was the same day as Jessica's regional swim meet, and her event had run long. I remember sitting at the head of a mostly empty table, pretending to be happy. Listening to the clock on the wall tick louder and louder. Jessica's parties were the stuff of neighborhood legend. She'd had a bouncy castle one year, a magician the next. For her sweet 16, they rented out an entire event hall. But I was the responsible one. I was expected to understand. My eyes lifted from the pig and scanned the room. They landed on the gifts under the tree, the ones with my name on the from tag. I had spent weeks picking them out. The Italian leather briefcase for my dad. I'd seen him admiring a similar one in a store window downtown. The delicate silver bracelet from Tiffany's for my mom. She'd torn a picture of it out of a magazine and left it on the kitchen counter for a month. The professional grade 300mm telephoto lens for Jessica's camera. She'd been talking non-stop about wanting to get into wildlife photography. These weren't just gifts. They were proof. Proof that I listened. Proof that I was successful. I had just been promoted to senior structural engineer at one of the top firms in the state. I had rehearsed the little speech in my head, planning to tell them after the gifts were opened, hoping that maybe, finally, An achievement of mine would be met with the same unrestrained joy Jessica received for just existing. The words now felt like sand in my throat. I have to use the restroom, I said. My voice quiet but steady. I placed the piggy bank on the coffee table with deliberate care, as if it were a precious artifact. I stood up, my knees cracking in protest, and walked down the hall. The polished wood felt cold beneath my feet. In the bathroom, I turned the lock. The click echoed in the small space. I leaned over the sink, my hands gripping the cool porcelain edge, and looked at my own reflection. There were no tears. My face was a placid mask, my expression eerily blank. It was the calm of a deep lake just before the ice cracks. My chest felt tight, solid, as if someone had filled it with concrete. It wasn't the fiery burn of anger or the aching hollowness of sadness. It was something far colder, far more final. It was the feeling of a switch being flipped, a connection being severed. In that moment, looking into my own strangely determined eyes, I knew I was done. That night, I lay in bed, the familiar floral-scented sheets of my childhood room suddenly feeling alien. The sounds of celebration drifted up from downstairs, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of a Christmas movie. Their easy laughter. They were a perfect family in a perfect home. And I was a ghost haunting the edges of their happiness. They hadn't asked where I was. They hadn't noticed I was gone. At 2:17 a.m., when the house was finally still and dark, I swung my legs out of bed. I moved without a sound, a shadow in the moonlight filtering through the window. I pulled a large cardboard box from the closet, ignoring my suitcase. I wasn't packing for a trip. I was evacuating. I carefully packed the items that held the story of the person they had never bothered to see. A worn, one-eyed teddy bear named Barnaby. My silent confidant through years of forgotten school plays and lonely nights. My college photo album, filled with pictures of my real family, the friends who had celebrated my wins and held me through my failures. My first set of expensive German drafting pencils, a gift to myself after I passed my professional engineering exam. My hand brushed against a thick, heavy binder on the shelf of my old desk. The spine was neatly labeled in my own handwriting, Smith Residence Structural Retrofit. I opened it. Page after page of my own work stared back at me, complex load calculations, detailed stress diagrams, and the final, stamped architectural blueprints for the cantilevered deck they now enjoyed every summer. I remembered the endless nights and weekends I had poured into this project, the pride I felt in solving its complex engineering challenges. I had done it all for free, because my dad had said, with a casual wave of his hand, "Why would we pay a stranger when we've got a brilliant engineer in the family?" They had taken my brilliance and filed it under family obligation. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't just a binder of papers. It was a receipt for thousands of dollars of unbilled labor. It was a record of my value. It was mine. I closed the binder and placed it securely in the box. Downstairs, the house was silent. The Christmas tree lights cast dancing shadows on the walls. I walked into my bedroom and placed their expensive gifts, still perfectly wrapped, in the center of my neatly made bed. Then I went to the kitchen. I took my house key off my keychain and placed it on the granite countertop. The metallic click was sharp and final in the profound silence. The blast of frigid air outside was clarifying. Snow was falling heavily now, blanketing the world in a pristine, forgiving white. My 7-year-old Toyota, paid for in full with 5 years of disciplined saving, started on the first try. Its engine was a low, steady rumble, a sound of absolute reliability. I backed out of the driveway, my tires making no sound in the fresh powder. I didn't look back at the house. A perfect picture postcard of holiday warmth. As I turned onto the deserted street, the clock on my dashboard read 3:42 a.m. The only light inside the car was the soft glow of the instruments and the screen of my phone. Lying face down on the passenger seat. Suddenly, it buzzed to life, lighting up the cabin. The screen showed a smiling photo of my mother. The word Mom glowed. Insistent. I didn't have to guess why she was calling. She wouldn't be worried. She would be annoyed that the dishwasher hadn't been emptied from the night before, or that she couldn't find the good coffee beans. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't decline. I didn't answer. I just let it vibrate. Affrantique. Useless plea in the darkness. I turned up the heat, gripped the steering wheel, and drove south. The buzzing sound fading into the hum of the engine as I headed for the interstate. The phone continued its frantic, buzzing dance on the passenger seat. A small, desperate beacon in the vast darkness of the car. Each vibration was a phantom touch, a reminder of the life shrinking in my rearview mirror. I drove for what felt like hours. The rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers counting out a hypnotic beat against the falling snow. The highway stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of black asphalt disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom. I was a ship without a rudder, pointed in a direction south with no destination in mind. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. By the time the first, weak hints of morning began to bruise the eastern sky, my gas tank was nearing empty. I pulled off at a desolate exit. The only sign of life, a single, flickering fluorescent sign for a 24-hour gas station. I filled the tank, my movements stiff and robotic in the biting cold. Back in the car, the engine warming the cabin. I finally picked up the phone. The screen showed 3 missed calls and 1 new voicemail. My finger hovered over the play button, a part of me screaming not to listen, to just delete it and keep driving. But I had to know. I had to hear the final piece of evidence for the verdict I had already delivered. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the car, not with worry, but with a sharp, simmering impatience. Victoria. It's 6 in the morning. Where on earth are you? I woke up and the dishwasher wasn't emptied from last night. And your father can't find the good coffee beans. The ones you bought him. Are they in your car, honestly? If you were going to leave early, you could have at least had the courtesy to tell someone, call me back. The message ended. I listened to the electronic silence that followed. A void where concern should have been. The dishwasher. The coffee beans. Not are you okay, not did you get home safe, not we miss you. My existence had been reduced to a series of domestic tasks I had failed to perform before disappearing into a snowstorm in the middle of the night. A strangled sound escaped my throat. A laugh that was half a sob. It was the final, brutal confirmation. The period at the end of a 34-year-long sentence. That was when the dam of my composure, which had held firm for so long, finally shattered. I pulled back onto the highway. But I couldn't see the road. My vision blurred. The red taillights of a distant truck smearing into long, wavering streaks. A wave of exhaustion so profound it felt like a physical weight washed over me. I took the next exit, which led to a deserted rest stop. I parked the car in a far corner, under the lonely glare of a security light, and I finally let go. The grief I had been suppressing for my entire life came pouring out. It was a raw, ugly cry, the kind that convulses your entire body, leaving you breathless and hollowed out. I wept for the 10-year-old girl with the store-bought cake. I wept for the high school valedictorian whose parents missed her speech. I wept for the woman who had spent a fortune on gifts in a desperate, futile attempt to buy the love her sister received for free. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut. Until there was nothing left inside me but a vast, aching emptiness. I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to the sharp, insistent ringing of my phone. The sun was up now, casting a pale, wintry light over the landscape. My head throbbed, and my neck was stiff. I looked at the screen. It wasn't my mother this time. It was Monica, my best friend since college, the one person who knew the full, unedited version of my family story. I swiped to answer, my voice a broken croak. Vic, oh my God. Vic! What's wrong? I can hear it in your breathing. I tried to speak, but only a choked sob came out. Don't talk, she said immediately, her voice a lifeline of calm authority. Don't say anything. I got a weird text from your cousin asking if you were with me. I know what today is. Just listen to me. Where are you? I don't know, I whispered. A rest stop. Somewhere in southern Ohio. Okay. Okay. Are you driving south? Yes. Good, she said, and I could hear the determination in her voice. Keep going. Don't think. Just drive. Head toward San Francisco. My couch is yours. My home is yours. For as long as you need. Do you understand me? Vic, just get here. For the first time in my life, I accepted help without arguing, without insisting I could handle it on my own. Okay, I said, the word a small puff of surrender. Okay. Hours later, somewhere in the rolling hills of what must have been Kentucky, I stopped at a roadside diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1,970 seconds. I needed food. And more importantly, coffee. I sat at the counter, hunched over the menu, feeling raw and exposed. The waitress, a woman in her late 60s with kind, tired eyes and a name tag that read Gloria, slid a mug of coffee in front of me. You look like you're a long way from home. Honey, she said. Her voice a gentle southern drawl. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. I gave her a weak smile. You could say that. She topped off my coffee, even though I hadn't taken a sip yet. Let me tell you something my mama told me. And it's the truest thing I know, she said, leaning against the counter. Blood makes you related. That's all it does. It's love, and loyalty, and respect. That's what makes you family. Don't you ever forget that? She patted my hand, then moved down the counter to take another customer's order. Her words settled over me. A warm, comforting blanket. I drove for 2 more days, fueled by greasy diner food and endless cups of coffee. I slept in cheap motels, falling into a dead, dreamless sleep the moment my head hit the lumpy pillows. And then, on the 3rd morning, I saw a sign that made my heart leap, "Welcome to California." As I crossed the state line, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time since I'd left Ohio. It felt like a sign. I pulled over to the shoulder, the desert landscape stretching out around me, and took out my phone. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled to Mom, held my finger on the screen, and pressed delete. I did the same for Dad. And then for Jessica. A profound sense of lightness filled me. I was cutting the anchor. The next 3 weeks in San Francisco were a blur of logistics and quiet healing. Monica was a rock. She didn't pry or push. She just made sure I ate, let me sleep on her couch, and sat with me in comfortable silence while I stared out her apartment window at the fog rolling in over the bay. With her encouragement, I put in a request for a transfer to my firm's West Coast office, citing a family emergency that required my relocation. My track record was flawless, and the request was approved within a week. Monica helped me find a small, sun-drenched studio apartment in a quiet neighborhood, its single large window looking out onto a small, shared garden. It was the first space that was truly, entirely mine. My new life began to take shape, one small, deliberate step at a time. I found a therapist, a kind, no-nonsense woman who helped me unpack 34 years of emotional baggage. I started a pottery class at a local community center. There was something profoundly healing about taking a formless lump of gray clay and shaping it into something solid, something useful, something beautiful. I placed the pink plastic piggy bank on the windowsill of my new apartment. Every Friday, after I got my paycheck, I put $2 inside. It wasn't a home fund anymore. It was my self-worth fund. A small, weekly ritual of investing in myself. The months slipped by. The chill of a San Francisco winter gave way to a bright, breze spring. I settled into my new job, throwing myself into challenging projects that demanded all of my skill and attention. I made new friends. I explored the city, discovering hidden stairways, tiny neighborhood parks, and the best burrito spots. The silence from Ohio was deafening. My birthday came and went in June. I received a single, perfunctory text message from a number I didn't recognize, but knew was my mother's. Happy birthday. Hope you are well. I didn't reply. It was a painful confirmation that their effort ended at a 10-second text, but it was also liberating. I was truly on my own. And I was not just surviving, I was thriving. A year passed. I was a different person. The nervous, accommodating woman who had sat on that living room floor had been replaced by someone calmer, more centered, someone who was learning to say no. I had just successfully overseen the completion of a complex seismic retrofitting project for a historic downtown building, and the praise from my superiors was still warming me. Life was not just good, it was peaceful. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my work inbox. It was from a sender I didn't recognize, but the subject line made the breath catch in my throat. It read, "Urgent structural issue at Smith Residence." My maiden name. The sender was my father. My heart, which had been beating so calmly just moments before, began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. The past wasn't just knocking on my door. It was sending a formal, written request. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. The world around me seemed to recede. The low hum of the office ventilation and the distant clatter of keyboards fading into a dull, muffled roar in my ears. All of my focus narrowed to the single line of text on my screen. Urgent structural issue at Smith Residence. It was a formal, impersonal subject line, the kind one might send to a contractor, not a daughter. My hand, which had been guiding my mouse, was frozen in place. My blood ran cold, then hot. It was a strange, dizzying sensation. After a year of carefully constructed peace, the past hadn't just knocked on my door, it had kicked it down with a steel-toed boot. With a tremor I couldn't control, I clicked it open. The email itself was just as clinical as the subject line. There was no "Dear Victoria." "No, I hope you're well." It was a sterile, bullet-pointed list of facts. A severe thunderstorm last month caused a large tree branch to fall, striking the corner of the deck. The city inspector, called in to approve the repair work, has flagged the entire deck structure as unpermitted construction. The city is requiring the original engineer-stamped structural plans and calculation packets for retroactive approval. Without these documents, we are facing significant fines and a demolition order for the entire structure. We need the files you created. Please send them as soon as possible. Regards, Robert Smith. Robert Smith. Not Dad. I read the email 3 times. Each word a small, sharp jab. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. The deck. The monument to my uncredited labor. The project I had poured my expertise into for free to save them money was now a financial time bomb. And I, the ghost they had erased from their lives, was the only person in the world who could defuse it. A slow, cold fire began to burn in my chest. A feeling so foreign and powerful it almost scared me. It was the feeling of holding all the cards. I didn't reply. I closed the email, minimized the window, and stared at the blueprints for the project I was currently working on. But the lines and numbers blurred into meaningless shapes. My mind was racing. A whirlwind of anger, pain, and a terrifying, exhilarating sense of opportunity. The old Victoria, the responsible one, would have attached the files and sent them within the hour. Apologizing for the delay. The old Victoria would have felt their panic as her own. But the old Victoria was gone. I had buried her in a snowstorm a year ago. For 2 full days, I lived with their silent, screaming emergency. I went to work. I attended my meetings. I went to my pottery class that evening and centered a lump of clay on the wheel. My hands steady, even as a war raged inside me. I told Monica everything over dinner that night. She listened patiently, then took a long sip of her wine. So, she said, her eyes gleaming, the chickens have come home to roost, and they want you to feed them. My phone became a vessel for their escalating panic. The first voicemail came that evening. From my father. His voice was tight with annoyance. Victoria, I sent you an email. It's urgent. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is serious. The next morning, a call from my mother. Her voice was a practiced blend of feigned concern and manipulation. Honey, it's Mom. Your father is so stressed out. I'm worried about his health. We just need those papers. Sweetheart, please, just send them for him. And that afternoon, the final, predictably escalation, Jessica. Her voicemail was a hysterical, tear-filled tirade. Victoria, what is wrong with you? Are you trying to destroy this family? Mom is a wreck. You're being so selfish after everything they've done for you. This is how you repay them, by letting their house fall apart over some stupid grudge. I listened to each message, and with each one, the last vestiges of my guilt withered and died. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding compliance. They didn't see a person, they saw a function. A tool that wasn't working correctly. On the morning of the 3rd day, I acted. I logged into my email provider and created a new, alternate address. It was simple. Sterile v. Smith. Structural. Consulting. From this new address, I forwarded my father's original email to myself. And then I replied, Dear Mr. Smith. I wrote, the words feeling powerful and strange on my keyboard. I am in receipt of your service request. Please outline the full scope of the required services, and I will generate a formal proposal and quotation for your review. Please note that all future communications regarding this matter must be directed to this email address. I hit send. The response was almost instantaneous. My personal cell phone began to ring. My father's name flashing on the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. Arnold. Pavlovian response. I took a deep breath, pressed the decline button, and watched the screen go dark. A few moments later, an email notification popped up. It was him. What is this, a quotation, Victoria? It's Dad. What are you talking about? Just send the plans. We don't have time for this. I took another deep breath, my fingers steady on the keys. As the requested documents represent a significant portfolio of proprietary intellectual property, a formal service and licensing agreement is required before their release. Please outline your requirements so I may generate the necessary documents. That night, I went to Monica's apartment with my laptop. I need your help, I said. I need to put a price on a year of pain. We sat on her floor with glasses of wine, and we drafted the most beautiful document I had ever seen. We didn't call it a bill. We called it a proposal for professional services. We broke it down into line items, each with a corresponding cost based on premium. Rush job industry rates in the state of California. Archival, data retrieval and preparation. The cost of locating and preparing my old digital and physical files. Structural recertification analysis. The work required to review and revalidate my original calculations against current building codes. Intellectual property licensing fee, single use. A one-time fee for the right to use my copyrighted engineering designs. Consultation and communication services. A flat fee covering all email correspondence. Emergency rush surcharge. An additional percentage for the expedited timeline. We researched every line item to make sure it was legally defensible. Monica, who worked in project management, was ruthless. This is what they understand, she said. Contracts, consequences, line items. They treated you like a utility. It's time they paid the bill. The grand total at the bottom of the page was $52. 750. I stared at the number, feeling a wave of nausea and exhilaration. It was an audacious, unthinkable amount. It was perfect. I attached the PDF to a new email and sent it. The explosion came 6 hours later. In the middle of the night, it was an email from my mother, and it was a masterwork of emotional warfare. It was a long, rambling essay that covered my difficult childhood, the sacrifices she and my father had made, the shame I was bringing on the family name, my cold, unfeeling nature, and how she couldn't believe the sweet little girl she had raised had turned into such a monster. It was designed to trigger every insecurity, every ounce of filial guilt she had spent 3 decades programming into me. A year ago, that email would have destroyed me. I would have been on the phone in tears, apologizing, sending the files for free, begging for forgiveness. But as I read it in the cool, blue light of my monitor, I felt a strange detachment. I saw the words not as a mother's cry of pain, but as a calculated tactic. It was an attempt to regain control, to pull me back into the old dynamic. I did not reply to her email. Instead, I replied to my father's. I attached a new document, a standard, legally binding independent contractor agreement. My one-line message read, "Please find the service agreement attached. A 50% deposit is required to initiate the work. The terms are non-negotiable." And then, silence. For a full week, I heard nothing. It was the longest week of my life. I went through the motions of my day, but my mind was elsewhere. Had I pushed too far? Had they found another way? I spent an evening researching, confirming what I already knew without my original calculation packets. Another engineer would have to start from scratch. They would need to conduct invasive tests on the deck, deconstruct parts of it, and essentially reverse engineer my work. It would take weeks, and the cost would likely exceed my own, quote. I had them trapped in a cage of their own making, built from their lifelong habit of taking the cheapest possible route. Then, the following Tuesday morning, as I was sipping my first cup of coffee and looking out at the foggy San Francisco morning, my phone chimed with a notification. It was from my banking app. Deposit received plus $26. 375. Ling ling. I stared at the green numbers on the screen. It didn't feel real. It wasn't money. It was a confession. It was an admission of their desperation. It was, in the only language they truly respected, an acknowledgement of my value. Un moment later, another notification. An email. It was from my father. There was no text in the body. There was only a single attachment. Service Agreement, Smith, Signed. PDF. I didn't feel the triumphant glee I had expected. I felt a vast, chilling calm. The battle was over. I had won. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest. That night, alone in my quiet apartment, with the lights of the city twinkling below, I logged into my secure cloud storage. I navigated to a folder that hadn't been opened in over a year. And there they were. The files, the blueprints, the entire project. Pristine and waiting. I opened a new email, addressed to V. Smith. Structural. Consulting. My hand was perfectly steady as I moved the cursor. It hovered over the Attach Files button. A single click away from ending it all. My finger hovered over the mouse. The plastic cool and smooth beneath my skin. For a year, I had been running from a feeling. Now, I was staring at its digital embodiment. Everything that had happened, every mile I had driven, every tear I had shed, had led to this single, simple action. It wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. That word felt too hot. Too messy. This was about something colder, cleaner. It was about balance. It was about closing a ledger that had been unfairly weighted against me for 34 years. I took a deep, slow breath. The kind my therapist had taught me. I felt the air fill my lungs, steadying my hands. I thought of the pink plastic pig, of the 2 single-dollar bills, of the dismissive tone in my mother's voice on that final voicemail. I thought of Gloria, the waitress in the roadside diner, and her quiet wisdom, love, loyalty, and respect. That's what makes you family. They had offered me none of those things. What I was about to offer them was not love, but a transaction. It was the only language they had left me. I clicked. The sound was small, insignificant in the quiet of my apartment, but it resonated through me like a seismic shock. A tiny animation on the screen confirmed the action, a paper airplane soaring into the ether. Files sans. A wave of something I couldn't name. Not triumph. Not joy. But a profound and sudden lightness washed over me. It felt as if a heavy, invisible cloak I had been wearing my entire life had just been lifted from my shoulders. I could breathe. I leaned back in my chair, the tension draining from my neck and back, and I watched the city lights twinkle outside my window. The work was done. I didn't have to wait long. A little over an hour later, an email notification chimed. It was from my father's email address. I opened it. my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. The body of the email contained only 2 words. Files received. There was no thank you. There was no we appreciate this. There was only a cold, terse acknowledgement of receipt, like a confirmation from a shipping warehouse. And in that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. They weren't capable of seeing the human cost, only the logistical solution. A year ago, those 2 words would have broken my heart. Now, they were a liberation. They were the final proof that the family I had mourned was never real to begin with. With a sense of calm purpose, I opened my invoicing software. I created a new invoice for the outstanding balance, $26. 375. Ling ling. In the due date field, I entered a date 15 days from the present. I attached it to a new email. Dear Mr. Smith, I wrote, please find attached the final invoice for the completed services as per our agreement. Payment is due within 15 business days. Thank you for your business. I hit send. Then, I created a new filter in my email client. Any message from their known email addresses, or any email containing the name Smith in conjunction with their Ohio address, would henceforth be automatically archived and marked as read. I would not see them. I would not be tempted to read them. The transaction was complete. The door was closed. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in my entire adult life. The money arrived in my bank account 10 days later, without comment or delay. The full amount. Seeing it there didn't bring a rush of excitement. It brought a quiet, profound sense of peace. It was the sound of a debt being settled. A few weeks after that, I was having dinner with Monica. She was scrolling through her phone, a small, mischievous smile on her face. So, she said, not looking up, I heard a little something from the Ohio grapevine. Oh, I said, trying to sound casual as I took a bite of pasta. My cousin Shannon, who is friends with your cousin Mark's wife, she says things are tense at the Smith family compound. Monica finally looked up, her eyes dancing with vicarious satisfaction. Apparently, Robert and your mom had to take out a home equity loan to pay for the unexpected engineering fees. Jessica had to sell her BMW. I nearly choked on my linguine. What? Yep, Monica said, taking a triumphant sip of wine. Turns out, having a $50,000 hole blown in your finances makes it hard to afford the lease payments on a luxury convertible. Shannon said Jessica had a complete meltdown. Apparently, she's now driving a used Honda, just like the one she used to have. I put my fork down. A slow, disbelieving smile spreading across my face. It was a detail so perfect, so poetically just, that I couldn't have written it better myself. The symbol of their blatant favoritism, in the centerpiece of my final Christmas humiliation, was gone, sacrificed on the altar of their own making. And the best part, Monica continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, they told everyone that the damage from the storm was much worse than they thought and that the contractor massively overcharged them. They're telling anyone who will listen what a victim your father is. I started to laugh. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh of pure, unadulterated release. Of course they were. Of course, they had constructed a narrative where they were the blameless victims. Their self-perception was a fortress, impenetrable to the truth. But it didn't matter. I knew the truth. And their bank account knew the truth. That weekend, I walked to my bank and made a withdrawal. I came home and took the pink plastic piggy bank from my windowsill. It was light, almost empty, containing only the few $2 payments I had made to myself in those first uncertain months. I pulled out the rubber stopper and shook the folded bills into my hand. Then, I took the check I had written to myself from my wallet. It was for the full amount, $52. 750. I folded it neatly, pushed it through the small slot in the pig's back, and replaced the stopper. I held the pig in my hands. It felt heavy now. Solid. It was no longer a symbol of my worthlessness. It was an invoice. Paid in full. It was the foundation of my new life. A life I had built myself. Not with $2 from them, but with the full, undisputed value of my own skill and my own strength. I finally understood. The revenge was never about watching them fall. It was about having the strength to stand on my own and let them face the consequences of their own choices. I hadn't lowered myself to their level of emotional manipulation. I had forced them to meet me on mine, a world governed by contracts, accountability, and clear, hard numbers. I didn't need their apology or their acknowledgement. Their payment was enough. Months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, I was at the pottery studio. My hands were covered in cool, wet clay, and the rhythmic whir of the wheel was a meditative hum. The sun streamed through the large warehouse windows, illuminating the dancing dust motes in the air. I was working on a large vase, my fingers expertly guiding the spinning clay upwards, shaping it, giving it form and purpose. My mind was quiet. I wasn't thinking about Ohio. I wasn't thinking about what ifs or what could have beens. I was just there, in that moment, creating something new. On a shelf near my workstation, among my tools and sponges, sat the pink plastic pig. I had brought it to the studio. It didn't belong in my apartment anymore. It had served its purpose. It was a reminder not of pain, but of a beginning. It was the first, ugly, necessary brick in the foundation of the life I now lived. A life that was quiet, and peaceful, and entirely, unapologetically, my own. I smiled, dipped my hands in the water, and continued to shape my creation. My back straight and my hands steady. The wheel kept turning,